Ladies and gentlemen, this is session 4. Professor Bogdan here. This is the time when we begin to wrap things together. We have studied so far how to observe a passage. We have studied how to do a historical cultural background on a passage and the author, and we have learned how to look at the literary context, which is the previous and the following passage. We have also learned how to do a word study. Well, all these things are part of step 1 in our interpretive journey. And I need to warn you that as you prepare for your final paper, step 1 is the part that is going to take most work and most time. So don't panic and don't try to be brief on that, because everything else will be grounded on this one. This is the big and most important section of your passage, of your study and of your interpreting journey. And if you do this well, the other steps will flow easily. If this is not done well and thoroughly, the other steps will be compromised. So let's look at the interpretive journey now and do a summary, because your next assignment, the one in chapter 16, is going to be your opportunity to integrate all the five steps of the interpreting journey into one assignment. And this is your opportunity to practice, so by the time you get to your final paper, you will already know how to do it and will follow the steps. So let's look at do a summary on our interpretive journey and see what it includes. All right, so remember that we studied the 5 steps. The first step is grasping the text in their town. That means in the town of the original audience. And that involves understanding what was in the mind of the author and what was in the mind of the original audience when they received that message. The second step would be measuring the width of the river to cross. That is looking at the difference between their town, their culture, their history, their language, who they are, and our town here. The third step is crossing the principalizing bridge, which means look again at the differences, but also look at some of the similarities that are between their town and our town, and then extract from our passage, extract the biblical principle or the theological principle that the author is building into his message. After we have extracted the theological principle, then we look at the rest of the Bible and see if the principle that we have extracted is consistent with the rest of the scriptures. If it's not, then we have to look again and reformulate the principle, or make sure that we have extracted the principle that is truly biblically and theologically accurate, because it has to be tested against the rest of the scripture. So that is consulting the biblical map. And after we've seen that the same principle is consistent throughout the Bible, and we can look at 1 or 2 examples or even 3 examples that show how this principle is being reflected in the Bible, then we go to step 5 and take that principle and look and see how that applies to our lives today in our town. So step 1, grasp the text in their town. Step 2, measure the width of the river, see the difference, the gap that is between their town and ours, their culture and ours. Then cross the principalizing bridge, extract the biblical principle, consult the biblical map to make sure that the principle that we have extracted is consistent with the rest of the Bible, and then apply it to our lives. Now, as I mentioned, step 1 is the one that takes most work, most time, so be prepared to take your time and do it well. Because step 1 integrates the four dimensions that we have studied. So as you do first one, I want you to start by doing the historical cultural background. And that includes the biblical author. Who is the author? Where was he when he wrote? When did he write it? What prompted him to write? What was his relationship with the original audience, and so forth? Then look at the biblical audience. Who are they? What is their relationship with God, with each other? What were the circumstances in which they lived? What is their relationship with the author? And then other historical cultural elements, which include social, economic, religious, political, and so forth. So these things are in the historical cultural background. However, even though you study these, you need to be very specific. Try to include only those things that are relevant to understanding your passage and the specific book that you study. And try to stay to no more than a page and a half at the most. The second thing you look at is the literary context. That means looking at the previous passage and look at the following passage. So see at the previous passage, how is it connected with the passage you study? How reading the previous passage influences the way you understand this passage? Because if you don't look at your passage in its literary context, you can get the wrong meaning. So any text out of context is a pretext. You want to make sure that you read the passage in its context. So look at the passage before it and see what was the author talking about, and how did his logical thinking flow from what he said earlier into what he is saying in your passage. And then look at the following passage and see how this passage that you study leads him to the next idea that is in the following passage. So that's the literary context. And then this is going to take you a lot of work, and this is the detail, this is dissection, the textual observation and word study. So this is where you take one verse at a time, and you are going to look at the key words. Remember the key words that we studied? Crucial words that determine the meaning of the passage, and they can have theological or historical significance. And then there can be figures of speech, they can be repetitive words, and they can be difficult words or puzzling words. So as you look at your passage, try to select those words, crucial words, figures of speech, repetitive words, and difficult words. Select them so that you have them ready, and then begin to do a word study on those. And then the next thing you do is look at, take that list that we had. I gave you that list at the beginning of the class, I think in session 2, that includes connective words, association, alternation, contrast, comparison, and so forth, verbs, and other literary devices. So you have this attachment in your announcement in the dashboard. Look it up, make a printout, and follow it. You are not going to see every one of them in every passage, but you want to keep this list just to make sure that you looked for repetitive words, you looked for contrasts, and so forth. So that, and then look at that and identify them And then take verse by verse and take the words as they come in the verse. If it's a crucial word, deal with it. If it's another observation, like a connective word or a contrast, deal with that. And then you can go back to the word. Just take the verse and the words in, excuse me, in the words in the order in which they flow, and do a study that includes both textual observations and word study. In every verse. So write one verse at a time and then comment on it as you observe things in the passage. When you have done these three things, historical cultural background, literary context, and textual observation with word study, then and only then are you ready to move at the second step. Second step shouldn't take more than a paragraph. And you look at the differences between their town and our town. And after you look at the difference, then you will go to the third step, where you look at the similarities this time, and now you look at the passage. And based on the similarities and based on the things that the author is discussing there, see what is the biblical principle. And you need to formulate the biblical principle in no more than 1 or 2 sentences. Now remember, this is very, very important. It's just 1 or 2 sentences, but it takes a lot of deep digging and creativity in the way you formulate it. A principle, a theological principle, is a universal truth. So it has to withstand time and culture and everything else. It has to be true in any time, any situation, anywhere in the world. So when you write it, you want to make sure that it is a principle, it's formulating as a principle. Then when you extract the principle and you formulate it, you can look at the biblical map. Look in the Bible and see if that principle is consistent with the rest of the Bible. Think of or look at, try to extract at least 2 or 3 examples in the Bible where that principle is being evidenced, and illustrate that. And then when you see that it is, if you can't find, if it doesn't pass the test of biblical consistency, then you have to do it again. You have to look back at the principle and make sure that the principle is really, truly a biblical, theological principle that is consistent with the biblical map. And after that, and only after you have seen that it's consistent, then you can apply that principle to our situation. That is step 5, where you grasp the text in our town, meaning we look at the text and see what it means to us today, in our culture, in our situation, in our circumstances. So that's the overview. Now in the next presentation, I'm going to go a little bit in more detail, and I'm going to show you how you can do your assignment. How about that? That will ensure that you're going to do a good job. So we'll see you in the next presentation. God bless.